Good morning, everyone. I'm Jo Ann Koontz. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have some very esteemed guests. Joining me today from CBIZ is Gina Martin and Jennifer Bucker. Bucher. Good. So what I wanted to bring to you guys today is a little bit of a look into insurance. We've had a lot of discussions. Obviously, we do a lot of real estate transactions here in Sarasota, and we've had a storm or two roll through. So our clients are asking a lot of questions of us about insurance, and I'm also super concerned about the people that aren't asking questions. So I've worked with Gina for quite some time, and I wanted to tap her expertise, and she brought Jennifer along for the fun. So we wanted to provide a forum for you guys to explore what you know, what you think you know, what you have no idea you don't know, which is probably the most dangerous category, and how we can avoid being so nervous as the storm seasons approach. What should we be looking for in the existing policies and all of that kind of thing. So without further ado, if anybody has questions, you're welcome to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many as we can, and certainly if anything is too specific, the ladies will be able to to get with you. I'll drop their contact details in the chat so that everyone can get a hold of Gina. And if you have any questions as we go, just let us know. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting us. I thank everyone for coming and for you guys and inviting us. It gives us the opportunity to speak with everyone, try to increase the knowledge base of more people and address some of the concerns that have been occurring here recently, especially with the recent hurricanes.
Yeah, I could imagine you guys were flooded, no pun intended, or pun completely intended, with questions as the storms were rolling by. So
yes,
can
definitely.
you start, I guess, with just a little bit of an overview about managing risks? One thing that I hear from folks sometimes is, it just like insurance is like the fly at the picnic, right? Everybody just wants it to go away. They want to have it. They don't really want to think about it. There's certainly, in 15 minutes or less, you can get your insurance. If you're doing something in 15 minutes or less, you're not doing it thoroughly. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys approach evaluating risk and the benefit of having like one agent looking at your different types of risk exposure?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout the presentation, I'm definitely going to talk a little bit about why it is important to have clear and concise communication, make sure everyone is on board and has a good understanding of what you're talking about, because people interpret things many different ways. A common error that I see or a problem that I see is where people send emails and you don't have the voice inflection, so there can be misunderstandings, especially when you're dealing in sensitive issues. And Jennifer, I'm sure, can attest to that when it comes to claims. So managing the risk, having a full overview of all of the risks that you have in your household rather than just one or two policies at a time.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's always best to communicate. When you've got your agent and you're working with them, you really do need to communicate it. And I say communicate, I actually mean over communicate, because at the end of the day, it's your agent that's going to be able to help you to make sure that an insurance policy is there to meet your needs. I hear it a lot. One of the ones that I see a lot where, we've got, folks living in one house, you've got, a child living over on his own, but we're also managing his policy. Well, then, I shouldn't call him a child. We'll say a young adult, and the young adult then has roommates starting to live with them, and you get that. And so a lot of people don't think about this, whether it be a young adult or even us older folks, to the needs of, if you have people living with you, that really needs to be disclosed on say your auto policy. And a lot of people don't think about that. And it's not that you're trying to get to get somebody else covered on your auto policy, but you're trying to reduce those risks. And because at the end of the day, the carriers do look at it is if you've got somebody living with you, then that person technically has access to your auto. So where do we go from there with that? And if that person's driving the auto and it does get in an accident, it ultimately falls back to your policy. But if you didn't disclose or omitted the information that you have somebody else living with you on the policy, because some of the applications do ask who else is living here. And if you put nobody, unfortunately, the carriers do look at that as an omission, as a lie, and they could deny coverage. And we've unfortunately seen it where this has happened, and some of these claims can get pretty serious. If it's a minor fender bender, that's one thing, but when you get into serious claims and our litigious society nowadays, that could be a challenge.
Lawyers.
Yes. Yes.
No one likes lawyers, that's for sure. That is really good. I also see that come up when people move out of a primary residence and then they want to start maybe renting it or Airbnb-ing it. And I'm like, you have to tell your insurance agent that you're changing the use.
Yes.
And it's most of the time, it's not that people are trying to lie or omit. They just, you're last in the thought process, sadly.
Absolutely.
So what else are we not thinking of, especially as the storms have come through? I was loath to say that, like, what did you learn? Because of course you guys are the experts, but like, what have your clients seen? What have you heard from the general public? What do you see on the news that makes you go, that's completely not how that works? It's like me watching Suits, right? Like, that's not, no one's desk looks like that and has bourbon all day. So you must encounter things that you're like, what are the most common, I guess, myths or misconceptions that you run into with folks, specifically with respect to storms?
Yeah, Joanne, is it okay if I share my screen real quick?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to share this. Hopefully it comes through okay. If it's not, I apologize. So,
looks great.
We were just talking a little bit about, weathering the storm and going through some pro tips. First, I'm Gina with CBIZ, and Gina Martin, and Jennifer is our director of risk control group. She has a wealth of knowledge as you can tell by all the initials after her name. She is very, very well versed in many things as it comes to insurance. When it goes with that, also just real quick, Joanne, I hope you don't mind.
Please.
On who CBIZ is. So we are a publicly traded company, and we are here to help navigate challenges and look into the risk that you have. We are a top 7 here recently, large accounting firm, but we are in the top 30 of largest brokers for insurance here in the country, with over 2.8 billion in revenue, 160 offices, and over 135,000 clients. These are some of the services that we provide, Jennifer and I both, and the focus on this, discussion today is on the insurance side of things. We do have a very strong mission to provide exceptional advice and solutions. We believe in doing the right thing, doing what's right and fair, and working together. So across our organization, we have people that have many different specialties. So we use their wealth of knowledge to come in and help with some of this stuff. One of the 5 standards that CBIZ has that means it and really resonates with me is making sure that we're reliable, that we're sincere, we have personalization and confidence, and we build that trust. As Joanne showed, we send out the agenda earlier on what we're really talking about here, how to avoid gaps in coverage. We just talked a little bit about communication. And I found some really good quotes that I thought was something to really think about is, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it took place. So effective communication requires clarity and mutual understanding. And that is not always the case. A lot of times I'll repeat back what I heard to my clients to make sure I properly understood what their concerns are, especially when I'm dealing with a new client coming in. I want to make sure, okay, so your main concern is to communication, and that communication is annual reviews. Or you want to make sure that if you're late on a payment, I'm reaching out to you. or you're concerned that you don't have enough liability coverage. So making sure that everyone is on the same page is extremely important. Some examples, Joanne, that I heard of that I've witnessed, and how that communication or the illusion of communication breaks down, is I witnessed a client that came to me who bought a boat. She called her agent, had got insurance for the boat, and thought everything was fine. Well, in my review, the agent didn't notify the umbrella carrier that there was an additional exposure. And that meant there was a gap, so potentially no coverage. So don't always assume, make sure that everyone is on the same page. Another example is a carrier didn't notify us that they got a dog. And unfortunately, it was a breed of dog that the carrier that they were currently placed with won't cover. And some carriers will just exclude that coverage, but some don't want the policy at all. And the client was unfortunately dropped, and we had to scramble to find new insurance for them because that information wasn't disclosed. Here recently, unfortunately, I have a client who, changed the ownership of their condo into a trust to their children, and then leased the condo themselves. So they have a 99-year lease, paying their children in that trust. But the agent wrote the policy as owner occupied, and that's not correct. So we now have to rewrite that policy. And if there had been a loss, that could have been a severe issue on insurable interest. So assumptions really are the termites of relationships. And I want to say, I want to do my thumbs up for Henry Winkler here, for the Fonz, because that is truly a great quote here. Making assumption on what a person knows can lead to misunderstandings, unknown coverage gaps, and can really erode the trust. I talked a little bit about that umbrella in case anyone's not familiar with what an umbrella is. It's sometimes called an excess liability policy. And I think this picture really illustrates that the umbrella, covers everything underneath it. So if you have a homeowner's claim and an auto claim, watercraft, you have a certain amount of liability coverage there. Once that's exhausted, your umbrella could take over. And having one agent there to review everything will make sure that there isn't any exclusions. Sometimes coverages will have minimal limits on there, but the umbrella will still require you to reach another limit. So an example, if a dog liability, animal liability coverage only covers you up to 100,000, but your home is covered to 500,000, your umbrella could require you to fill that gap of 100,000 to 500,000 before the umbrella kicks in. So just that's a real quick overview on what that is. So we talked about the communication on some of these things, with homes. Jen did a really good job of touching in a family member moves in. We see frequently where grandchildren come to live with the grandparents, pets in the household. I had one where a vehicle was purchased for a grandchild, wonderful grandparents, wish I had them, and they sent it to the other state where the grandchild lived, and that information wasn't disclosed, that it was being garaged in a different location. Good intentions, nothing wrong with it. We just need to make sure the carriers are aware. Another jewelry purchase, Valentine's Day just came up. A lot of people purchase jewelry. And a big one I see is, a lot of people like to go to the galas where they have silent auction items, and you win these beautiful pieces of art and you bring them home. Well, some of those aren't covered 100%. They may only have $2,000, maybe about $5,000 in coverage, depending on how the policy is issued. You may need to have that itemized so that you have more coverage. And with so much construction going on, we see pools being put in, and we're not notified, or maybe a small conversation, well, yeah, I'm getting the pool put in, or, I'm renovating this. Well, you have additional exposures, and maybe the policy needs to have an endorsement for renovations and builder's risk. Some of those things, and generally went into vehicles, because there are differences that you need to notify us on. How is it registered? Under what name? Is it an LLC? Is it a business name? Is it a lease? Is there a lien holder? And because there is a difference between a newly added vehicle and a replacement vehicle. When you purchase a new car, you have to select the coverages that's added in. But if it's a replacement vehicle, frequently I've seen common practice where whatever car is being replaced, they use the same coverages, and that might not apply to the new car. Maybe it's a new car and you want to have, replacement or agreed value coverage. Or it has a lease and you want to have a lease gap coverage or a loan gap coverage. There's a lot of different options you need to consider. And of course, each carrier has requirements on how soon you notify us. So whether it be 7 days or 30 days, is it automatically covered? That needs to be taken care of and notified as well. And of course, Florida, if you don't provide proof of insurance, you might get a love letter, from the state saying, when you left the dealership, you said you had coverage with this carrier. Well, here it is a week later and you're still not showing it on the policy. So that information needs to be disclosed. If I can keep going, Jo Ann, do you mind?
I don't mind. I do have a couple quick questions though, if we can hit them about the umbrella before you move on.
Absolutely.
Someone asked, is there any umbrella that also covers rental properties, or do those need to be separate?
No, absolutely. Many carriers will include that, even if they're in an LLC. You just have to check with the carrier to make sure. Some of the more modest middle market insurance carriers will require you to have another policy with them. For example, like auto owners, travelers, you must have their auto insurance with them as well. And they absolutely exclude any LLCs and some rentals, depending on what state they're located in. I have a client with multiple rentals in California, and they won't cover the policy because of that. So then we have to go to a different entity. And if you have a condo in an LLC and it's a rental, all different exposures.
The umbrella is probably the biggest misconception that I stumble into in my practice. People are like, oh, I don't have to worry about that. I don't need an LLC. I don't need this. I don't need that because I have an umbrella. And I'm like, well, this is not like, like a bubble that you go into. These are contracts, and different umbrellas cover different things. So it's definitely something that I push folks back to their insurance agents on frequently, because they blow everything off. Like, I'm not worried about having an umbrella. And I'm like, but for what and for how much, and are these types of uses covered? Next question about the umbrella is, can you talk a little bit about the value of a home, as an example, being 500,000? How does the insurance company decide what is not sufficient coverage before the umbrella kicks in? So I guess what we're asking here is, like, what is the difference between, where does the umbrella pick up where homeowners leaves off?
Okay. So if it is a covered loss, you will have your homeowner's insurance up to the limit of the liability. And as long as the umbrella policy is covering that loss, so many umbrella policies will specifically state that they will only cover losses if it's covered underneath the underlying policy. So if there's an exclusion on your home for that loss, then there is a high likelihood your umbrella policy won't pick it up either. And that's why it's so important to have one agent who knows the policies and can review them all. That's usually how the umbrella policies work.
Gotcha. Okay.
Jen, did you want to add anything on that?
No, I was just gonna say, also, what they'll look at is your limits. So, what the insurance carrier is going to do, we'll just say that you're insuring your house, I think you said, for 500,000. So if it's a total loss, the carrier, they have insurance adjusters that specialize in the field work, go out, do the investigation of the house, the loss, the damages, and then they'll determine how much of that loss is. And then if it's going to exceed your limit of 500,000, that's when the umbrella will kick in. And typically umbrella carriers, if you have a large loss, we'll say a large fire loss, and we're not sure how much that loss is going to cost, a lot of umbrella carriers do require to be put on notice immediately. So that way they can be kind of out there in the back looking in to make sure that they're also getting everything they need in case they do have to step up to the plate. So we don't always put umbrella carriers on notice, but again, knowing the policy of that umbrella carrier, you know, they're going to specify exactly when they need to be put on notice, but a lot of it is going to depend on, for them to kick in is going to depend on what the primary layer of insurance does feel how much that loss is going to be.
Yeah, Jennifer, I think it's also important to note that an umbrella policy is sometimes called an excess liability policy. So in the example, like Jennifer mentioned, you know, if you're responsible for a fire, it causes damage to somebody else's property, then that would be liability. And that's where it would come into place. It's usually, from what I've seen, and Jennifer, you might have seen something else, it's usually just on the liability side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and, you know, an example, if you have $300,000 for liability coverage and your umbrella would pick up after that, you can have 500,000. And, you know, another thing in having a single agent is you can discuss, you know, how much more would it be to increase that to $1 million? You know, and a perfect example here recently, I was doing a review with a client at the renewal, and I ran comparisons. It only costs $26 more a year to increase the liability from 500,000 to $1 million. That's nothing, guys. Absolutely nothing when it comes to the amount of coverage that you have, really.
That's another thing that I push a lot is if you're having these discussions, some of these coverages cost very little or nothing. They're just riders that are being put onto another policy that you have existing, and you just need to know to ask. And of course, the client doesn't always know what to ask for, but when you have these holistic discussions, look, insurance is a tough topic in terms of being interesting and fun to look at, but but you know,
Well,
it's like it's
this morning hoping everyone would have coffee yet.
That's why I didn't start till 10. I'm not gonna put people through that too early. I mean, it's bad enough they're coming. I'm a lawyer and a CPA, and now it's insurance. Like, how much worse can it get? But you know, it's you've got to have those conversations and really explore, so that you find out what you don't know, and that's the biggest danger. Well, if someone says, "I decline that," great. At least you understood the risk and you can make that decision. But when you have no idea that it would be $26 more, when do you find out? Well, after you have a claim and you go, "Oh, I'm out of money," and you say, "Oh, well, if it was only 26 books more, you would have had double the amount."
Right.
You know, it's
You know, we
like,
talked a little bit about LLCs and trusts and having rental units. You know, you specifically mentioned that. Frequently, some of the carriers in this area, especially coastal areas, they won't include liability coverage when you have a condo or a home that's a rental. So they'll exclude liability. So you have other options that you can do where you can see if your homeowner's insurance will extend to the additional property. If it's a rental, probably not, but doesn't it? My philosophy is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I always ask. So that's one. Two, you can get you can get a premises liability policy on there that will get you to the limit so that your umbrella policy will cover it.
great. That's fantastic. We do have a question. Do you have any options if you aren't able to obtain a commercial flood or wind policy? Is there something like Citizens for commercial?
For a commercial flood specifically, was that?
This said flood or wind.
Okay, so for wind, yes. There is on a commercial side, there is a policy that can go to Citizens.
Oh, okay.
So from a commercial standpoint, yes, you have to be with an agent. Citizens is not a direct writer of anybody, so you do have to go through an agent with Citizens. For flood, Citizens does not do flood. So the flood would be just the standard market from a commercial standpoint, and that's the standard NFIP policy that many of us are dealing with here at this day, given everything that happened a few months ago. But there are also outside the standard, there's the private market, and that they can also do a private flood policy. on a commercial side and also on personal lines. What I've encountered and seen, why many don't go to the private market for flood is just because of the cost. You know, and a lot of folks look to we all have to do this. We have to look to see how much insurance do we want to pay for and what it's going to give back to us. And I think that's where, you know, as our agents, they do that comparison. This is what the NFIP program is going to cost you. This is what it's going to cover for you. But here's one from the private market. Again, they are considerably more. But the unfortunate thing is, I think a lot of people right now are finding out their flood program is not what they thought it was. And it's unfortunate, but the best thing that I can just tell everybody on for the flood is, you know, we got to think about it is because some of us are required to have it because of our mortgages. And so we get a policy, you know, especially in this area, not thinking we're going to really need it. And ultimately we did, but it's very specific on what it covers. You know, it's a program that's been out there for many, many years. It was created by the government, you know, and so.
So shocking that it doesn't work like you thought.
Exactly. Not trying to get political here, but with it being run by FEMA, it is very, very specific, and they have the carriers that manage the FEMA policies. They really have no wiggle room. I say this because again, we've been dealing with over 300 flood claims just for our agency. It's my understanding that from the FEMA policy, just for Florida, my last count, there was 74,000 flood claims filed just for Florida. It's a lot of claims, which is why many of us still to this day have not got the money we need from the flood policy, because everybody is just so inundated. But the important factor in this is just truly understanding that flood policy. I mean, if you go pull up the flood policy, it's literally 28 pages, and only 6 of the pages really are defining the policy. So if you think about it, it's like, how much coverage is really going to be there on those 6 pages? The carriers do follow the policy to the T. The positive, unfortunately, I'm not seeing it during this storm, is the adjusters that come out to do the inspections on these catastrophic claims. They're paid by how much money they can get, because they're not carrier adjusters when it comes to the FEMA policy. So they're a third party hired by FEMA. They are paid on what they get. These carriers understand this, and they honestly, in my opinion, in my experience, they try to do whatever they can possible to get whatever they can covered, and they are doing that. The part that they have to be careful of is because when the carrier gets that back, if the carrier does not get approval from FEMA, then the carrier is not going to be reimbursed from FEMA. So this is why during this particular situation, given everything we have going on, why carriers are being a little more detailed when they're critiquing the policy, because they have to get reimbursed by FEMA. So there's many layers of approval that are going on right now when it comes to the flood claims.
Now, when you mentioned that the policies weren't paying like you expect, you're talking about the FEMA policies. Do you expect with your higher premium in a private policy that your coverages are handled, that your reimbursements are handled more quickly? Or, I mean, they're buried too, but like, do you get better service when you're paying private?
Yes, in my experience with the private carriers, I do see the service turn around a lot quicker than I have been right now. Again, given the fact everybody's going to be inundated, we had basically 3 floods, 3 hurricanes in the matter of what, 60, 65 days?
Yeah, it was a
2
lot.
of them within 10 days. So everybody is definitely inundated, but I will say my experience is the private market. They do tend to turn them around a little quicker right now. You know, in a normal circumstance, had there only been one flood event going on, and it maybe not such a great magnitude, not having Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina involved in it, you know, they would have been turned around a lot quicker.
The geographic reach was huge, and like you said, the frequency and the proximity of the storms from a chronological standpoint is
Yes,
really unprecedented. So hopefully this is our one and done, and
I
we don't have
agree.
this again. Um, I know that in the hurricane insurance coverage in the wind policies, if you have protections in place, you can get a discount for your premium. Is there anything like that with flood? If you have any flood protection, do they offer any discounts in those policies? That's something someone has asked.
Gina, I don't know if you can answer that for the private market. There's not for the
The
NFIP,
FEMA.
the FEMA policy. Um,
Yeah, it's not like a normal homeowner's policy
yeah,
where you can get the discounts. There's really, when the flood, the actual definition of the flood is the inundation of a general and temporary condition of partial and complete area of 2 acres or more. So either an overflow of inland or tidal waters or a rapid accumulation. So it's clearly defined on what would be covered, and homeowners policies exclude that because of the severity of most of the floods. Most carriers don't want to discount the premium. I have seen that when you have an elevation certificate, that can be beneficial to getting discount, well, I say discounts, but reducing the premium to try to get that low. And, I have been very fortunate to see that the NFIP program, the National Flood Programs, whether they're, written by any of the other write your own programs, they're very limited on what, and I have seen that sometimes a private market would be less expensive depending on the amount of coverage that they have. So, with the National Flood Program, they have a maximum amount that will cover the building at 250,000, and that's all they cover. And and that replacement cost is, up to that limit, and where your contents is only actual cash value. So if you think about the difference between the replacement cost of going out and buying something new or having a yard sale to see what you can get for it, you of course would rather go with the replacement cost, right?
Sure.
That's where the private comes in. And you can get higher limits so that you can get replacement costs for the home as well as the contents. And there's other coverages as well. And Jennifer can attest to this. They'll sometimes cover other structures, and some of them will have extra money for pool repair and refills, as well as extra for temporary living expenses if you can't live in that home. And Jennifer mentioned, the number of claims, just in Sarasota in the past five years, there's been $939 million in claims paid. That's after deductibles. That's after the deductibles. So
yeah.
speak a little bit more on what you've seen as far as, coverages for things that wouldn't be in the NFIP program that is in the private.
Right. Yeah, no, and you hit it on it. I think I saw on one of this pools are absolutely excluded on the NFIP policy. Additional living expenses. The other big one, I get asked this question a lot, is bringing a property back up to code. So, if you've got to rebuild a substantial amount of the property, you've got to get it back up to code ordinance that are in place and put in place by FEMA. Unfortunately, the flood policy does not cover that. So I have a lot of folks that are like, so FEMA's requiring us to build this at a certain height, but yet the flood policy, now that we've had the flood, they're not going to pay to get us back up to, it's called ordinance and law. And it doesn't pay to get it back up to whatever the current code is of that particular county. So there are many things that are not covered under the NFIP program. So it's good to look at those things and truly understand them, because you need to understand, whether your pre-firm, post-firm, and I'm not going to bore anybody with those details because that could be a 2-hour conversation. But these are things that you need to kind of know because the limitations that FEMA has put on the policy, depending on certain criteria, you know, and that goes to whether something could be considered a basement. In Florida, we don't have many basements, but a true basement, the way I think of it, is not how FEMA defines a basement. So there's a lot of different criteria that go into that. Whereas on the private market, you know, I feel you definitely get more coverage. So you kind of got to look at it to see what's going to make sense for the dollars you want to spend if a catastrophe like this happens. You know, and sometimes folks just elect to self-insure with this. They're like, wow, you know, because maybe the premium is so out of reach, you know, but it's you got to kind of keep in mind then if an event like this happens, similar to this or even worse, knowing what's going to have to be done to rebuild. And that's where you kind of got to look at it, talk to your agent and kind of figure out what's the best avenue to go with it, because it is unfortunate. Another question I get asked a lot is like, well, you know, what about my wind policy, my property policy? You know, some people are like, well, I don't know if I have a wind policy. It's important to understand that if your policy doesn't specify that you cover wind, hurricanes, and that, then you probably don't have the coverage. Most policies that I know have a separate deductible for anything related to wind, and wind does not necessarily have to be a hurricane. You know, so those are important things to know. And you know, just in my own neighborhood, folks were asking, we're like, well, we just added wind. Is that a good thing? And I'm like, yes, you know, because they lost their carport. And so, you know, they were able to definitely get some stuff done. They had roof damage and everything. But, you know, you still have the wind deductible. But it's important to know that wind is not only just a named storm. It truly is wind, a windstorm, and if a carrier can classify it as a windstorm, then that's where it's going to go.
Absolutely. Now, when you're dealing with the National Flood Insurance Program, you have to remember it's a government-run program. You know, it started in 1968, so the maximum of 250,000 that covered most homes back then, and that's not the case now. You know, we've had
Has that number not been adjusted since it was put into place?
No. So, I mean, you can see
Wow.
here that there were 5 different adjustments that have occurred, you know, since the program was first enacted, with the most recent one requiring that the increase in premium can't exceed 18%. But the reforms in here are mostly regarding, as Jennifer mentioned, basements, you know, what is covered there. But the coverage amount has not changed. It is 250,000 for the building and 100,000 on contents. We have private flood carriers that will go up to 4 million in covering the home. And, you know, 500,000 for your contents. Now, keep in mind, if it's a flood, more likely the loss is going to come from what's inside the home than anything else. So,
yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Insurance people love to talk about exclusions. Can you give us a baseline, just like 30-second elevator speech on what the FEMA policy does cover? What can you expect to have paid?
Yeah,
3 years from now?
So again, it'll be a lot's going to depend on the building. The thing that I'd like to give an example for as far as the contents, if you take your contents, you take your house and you turn it upside down, anything that's attached more than likely is going to be covered under the policy, under the dwelling part of it. Anything that comes out, it will float out, will not be covered under the dwelling part. And I see this a lot because a lot of folks don't think to put contents on their flood policies. And I think, you know, they don't.
You're not with
realize
me,
it.
Jennifer, I'll tell you that.
And I think a lot of people do think like, okay, well, if the flood policy doesn't cover it, then my homeowner's policy is going to cover it. And that's a huge misconception. A lot of people think it's important to know if it's flood, your homeowner's policy absolutely, or commercial property policy will not cover it. You know, because if it's damaged by water, by the rising water, by the definition, and it's a flood, any property policies,
They're
whether
all
it's personal
excluded.
or commercial, will not cover it.
Yeah, I will say that I have noticed there are a couple carriers now that will offer a rider or an endorsement onto the homeowner's policy to cover a certain amount of flood, but usually it's $10,000 or $20,000, but that's still good to have on there as well.
For sure. We're getting a lot of questions about roofs, and I don't know if you're ready to go there yet. So I just
Is
want to,
it wind related?
yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the storm deductibles. Jennifer talked
Okay.
about that, and maybe that'll answer some of everyone's questions. If not, we'll absolutely answer them.
Okay.
So, you know, with storm deductibles, there is a difference between damage caused from wind and damage caused from hurricane. And some carriers have clear definitions of what those are. So wind deductibles or wind coverage is usually not a named storm. It can be high winds, but it could be covered, depending on how the policy is written, it could require the hurricane or wind deductible. Some carriers will specifically list that it has to be a named storm. It can be anywhere in the state of Florida, not just your area. And the deductible is in force for up to 72 hours after the storm warning is over. So any residual wind that comes through, then your hurricane deductible could be applied. So you really have to be careful and read that. And some will list it specifically as hurricane. So you have to read the definitions in the policy. Your agent should be explaining that as well. And that, you know, Jennifer, you touched a little bit on the difference of those and how the deductibles would apply. You know, talking about roofs, some of the trends that I'm seeing, and especially with renewals. So existing policies that are now getting these notifications sent to policyholders, and they may not notice it, is that there's a roof settlement endorsement. So they're now doing a depreciated value on your roof based on how old it is. And that is becoming more and more popular. They're also doing roof resurfacing, where if anyone has lived in a neighborhood where somebody's knocking on the door saying, I can get your whole roof replaced because they can get a couple of shingles missing. And, you know, because of the law, they're required to replace the whole thing. Well, they're now adding that endorsement in there where they're not going to do that. It's going to be very similar, you know, requiring higher deductibles, stronger wording and limitations and exclusions specifically for roofs. And some are requiring proof of flood insurance. And you can get different deductibles for auto insurances for flood that are coming in. I haven't seen it in the carriers that I have, but I do know the scuttlebutt is that they are going to be adding a different deductible for flood losses. So be on the look for that. You know, what was it specifically they were asking about roofs?
So the question is, can you talk more about roof claims and strategy? Should homeowners contact public adjusters? Lots of clients are stuck between roofers quoting a need for a new roof and the insurer denying coverage and reimbursing for repair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and we see this a lot. I was actually at a legal seminar last week, and this was one of the topics. I will tell you, carriers are definitely starting to be more aggressive when it comes to roof, and not, and I'm not throwing the fraud word out there for us on this call, but for these folks that are making the phone calls, coming knocking on the doors. I'm still getting phone calls telling me they want to come inspect my roof. And I'm like, my roof is 2 years old. My roof is fine. And I'm like, I've had my roofer out there to inspect. And they're like, oh, but let us please come and look. Come to find out, you know, just in this seminar, you know, they were able to get surveillance pictures of these roofing contractors going up on a roof and actually destroying the roofs. So that way they could get the claim. So not to say anybody's trying to do that, but carriers are starting to really investigate it now. And I think we're beyond the days where they're just like, yeah, okay, we'll pay for a whole new roof. So they are asking for this. To hire a public adjuster, there's a time and a need for a public adjuster by all means. but you need to know that that public adjuster is more than likely going to take a percentage of whatever money the carrier is going to pay for you on that. The other part of that is knowing exactly who your vendor is. Have a trusted vendor. Get multiple quotes when it comes to the roof, because carriers are also looking at it. You need to understand, I think Gina mentioned the age of the roof. You need to know the age of your roof. You need to know the condition. So, it's important to know what the condition of your roof is. You can have people come out there and do an inspection on your roof and say, yeah, your roof is good here, your roof is good there. And then if we have a storm and then you have the damage, then at the end of the day, you can present that information to say, look, I had them out here, 6 months ago and they said my roof was fine. And now we're having this damage. So it's important to get different vendors in the area that you live in, that you trust, and see if they're all consistent with the same story. Because then that information can absolutely be presented to the carrier. If a carrier comes in and says, yeah, no, we're only going to repair X, Y, and Z on this roof. But if you've got 3 and 4 quotes of reputable vendors that can support it, then the carrier will definitely take that and look. I mean, my neighbor, they're talking about doing a repair on their roof, and the adjuster told them, hey, well, if your roofer's saying that it needs to be repaired, please have them documentation. Pictures is so important in any claim situation, from the beginning to the end. Have them document, show me that they're trying to take off the roofing tiles, and that they're disintegrating, they're breaking apart, so they can see that, because that's what their roofer told them. Like, if I start to repair some of this, there's the age of it and the damage is so severe. So it's just a matter, sometimes we have to tell that story, and from the agency standpoint, that's what we do. The biggest thing I can stress is documentation across the board. Anything claim related, have documentation showing your damage. Don't throw anything away. I understand, especially after a flood, we want to get this wet stuff out of here. After a flood, you absolutely need to do what you can to help minimize it. And that means, that for a flood, they say, go 2 feet above the water line, but have pictures of that water line, because the quicker you get that dampness, that water out of their carpet out of there, the less damage it's going to cause. So it's truly have pictures to support what was there, what was damaged, and what you're doing to prevent it.
Is it important to take pictures before the storm? Like, you hear the storm is coming, should you run and photograph everything, or?
I say yes, because I mean, some of the flood claims that I'm dealing with right now, the flood adjuster came in and and it doesn't even have to be flood, but they're saying, oh, well, we had this built in our living room. Well, when the remediation company came out, they tore it out. So the adjuster didn't see it when he came out there. So for you to be able to show what you had prior to the storm, that helps the adjuster know exactly what's going on. And that includes your appliances, knowing their age, their make, their model. I can say I'm bad at it, so I'm not trying to put this on everybody, but keep those receipts. So that way, if you've got a 2-year-old, refrigerator that you spent $2,000 on, at least the adjuster will know that, because all adjusters, that's what they're asking for: receipts, make, model, serial number of everything. So I don't write it all down. I take a picture of it and I have it stored on a little flash drive, and that's where all my stuff is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Having one place and having that flash drive in a secure place that can go with you or is not floating around in the floodwater.
Yes.
I'd like to expand a little bit more on roofs.
Please.
We talked about the roof settlement. So here recently, I've noticed that some of the carriers are reducing the amount of time or the age of a roof before they'll consider covering it. And I've seen it come down to 10 years old, depending on if it's a shingle roof, a metal roof, or a tile roof. It's varying based on the risk tolerance of each one of these carriers. So having a wind mitigation report that's less than 5 years old, as well as a 4-point inspection, because a 4-point inspection actually lists the remaining useful life of a roof. The wind mitigation report does not show that. It shows, is there any evidence of roof? How's it attached? The materials, when it was installed, and it has pictures. So there is a difference on roofs to make sure and keep that in mind. And so many of my clients, they hear they need to have a wind mitigation report or a 4-point inspection. It's really quick and easy. There are a lot of inspectors out there will come out and be gone in 10, 15 minutes. And
it's not super costly.
It's not anywhere from, $150, and it could save you thousands. I had one client save them $3,000 by having that report submitted. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the different types of roof materials and how those would affect cost, like a metal versus tile versus shingle roof?
Yeah, they prefer, no matter what kind of roof it is, that you have a secondary water resistance in between the roof deck and whatever materials used. That roof material, that is basically like a tar, something that prevents the water from going through. So you have your roof, and then you have the secondary water resistance. So it gives that extra secondary protection on there. So no matter what kind of roof you have, if you have a tile roof, they have a longer life expectancy. Carriers are more likely to be favorable on them. I will tell you, the trend right now is metal roofs. They want to see metal roofs, the standing seam where they're joining together so that they don't, it's less likely to have resistance. It's, less likely to have, if something lands on it, it's less likely to penetrate through. So Jennifer, have you seen any claims for metal roofs?
Yeah, well, not from storms. The only metal roof claim I've seen is when they had a vendor get up there and walk on it and dent it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's it, but nothing from a storm.
Yeah. The flat roofs are not usually favored in carriers because it can puddle. But there are some great improvements in flat roofs, either because they're usually some sort of an incline. They have a TPO, which is like a commercial grade membrane that is very resistant and has a longer lifespan. As the information is coming available, the carriers are, gathering the statistics on the loss and the amount of claims that there are, and using that information to rate and become more favorable in some of these.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about, we talked a little when we first started about when things change and when uses change and you don't know about it. Can you talk a little bit about vacant properties and if people are moving between properties and how that affects their coverage? So if I'm, building my new house and I move out of the one I was just in, what happens when, in terms of the risk, in terms of the cost, whether or not it's reported to the carrier? How does that make changes when the property becomes vacant?
Usually people don't tell us when they're putting their house on the market. Who thinks about that? It's still there. It's, nothing's really changed. It's for sale. So carriers do not like to insure homes that are for sale, especially when they're not owner occupied. So there is a new policy that should be written to cover that risk. It's much more expensive, but it's for a shorter period of time. They do not cover any contents in there. So if you have a staging company come in, make sure that they are covering their own property. Vacant properties are really unfavorable. They're susceptible to vandalism for squatters. And it can, if something were to occur inside the residence or the property, there's no one there to check to see if it's occurred and to try to stop it. An example is you going on vacation and you come home and your refrigerator, failed and there's water everywhere in the kitchen. That's the same thing that can kind of happen with a vacant home, or can happen with a vacant home. Or if a realtor is going through and it's vacant, they leave all the lights on, or they, something gets, the faucets left on, or, anything can explode, or they turn down. I had a client where the painters came in to paint the vacant home and cranked up the AC so high that it froze. And the condensation pipes leaked into the home, causing damage. And then, so then you had the temperature of the home going up and down, and it caused a lot of damage. So it's important to be there, or at
Yeah,
least have
I-
somebody coming by. If you have somebody who's there on a regular basis checking on it, then we can address that with the carrier to see if they'll take that risk.
Right, because a lot of personal and commercial properties, they do have exclusions for vacant properties. I just
Or
got
for
done
sale.
just got done dealing with one on the commercial side, and we had to basically jump through some hoops to show that it's not a vacant property. And so it's just a matter of that documentation and telling that story. But it's important to know, if you've got a property sitting there for sale and nobody's checking on it, nobody's there, the carrier's going to have a problem with it.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
with internet and Google and everything else, it's becoming standard practice that the underwriters, when they're receiving these new homes, they're doing a search on the home to see if it's listed somewhere for rent, if it's listed
Wow.
for sale, so they can find that information out. And if it wasn't disclosed, rather than giving you an opportunity to explain, they'll just cancel the policy.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
I see another question in there that I can go ahead and address.
Okay.
So the question, I don't know if everybody can see them. It says, if a claim to FEMA was made from the storms and the amount was paid out of pocket because it was less than the homeowner's deductible, how does it work when FEMA wants to see the insurance denial? Do we need to file a claim with the insurer? Even though it's not going to meet the deductible? Unfortunately, if it's a wind event, then yes, you do have to file the claim with the carrier. And honestly, we've had several of those, even from a flood standpoint. I've got folks that did not have flood insurance that were flooded. And so we still had to file a claim with our property carrier to get that denial, because FEMA wants to see that denial. FEMA wouldn't even accept that to show that they have no flood insurance, but they need to see the denial. So unfortunately, we have had to file claims like that, and we tell our adjuster and our carrier, we know either we don't have coverage or it's below our deductible. We're trying to work with FEMA, and they need to see the denial from it. So unfortunately, yes, it does need to be filed with the carrier if you're working with FEMA.
And
Does
of
that
course,
affect your?
if it's not, if it's a windstorm cause of the damage and you're putting in a separate claim for flood damage, they need to see that you tried to recover flood insurance under the wind claim. Is that what you're saying?
Well, both. They need to show that there's been an actual denial of a claim. If it's a flood claim, they do need to show that your homeowner's policy is excluding it and denying it.
Okay.
Even though we've sent them copies of the policy showing there's
Yeah.
no flood on the homeowner's policy, they still wanted an official denial from the carrier.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Does that affect their renewal? Having
Um,
made that claim that isn't going to go anywhere?
It could.
Yeah.
I can't definitely say. I would hope not. Because nothing was paid out, nothing was there. But it could.
Okay.
They'll want to see that everything was repaired properly so
Yeah.
that they don't have an exposure for mold and mildew or limited fungi exposure. So they will want to see that anything that was claimed, whether it was covered or not, has been repaired. So even if it's under your deductible and it was denied, you still have to show proof that it was that the repairs have been done and properly. So they'll frequently ask for receipts and pictures showing that the work is done satisfactorily.
Gotcha. I have one unusual question. What is the best approach to covering a waterfront property in a mobile home park where there is a physical structure like a carport, laundry storage room, but the residence is actually an RV? What happens if the structure or the RV are destroyed by a storm?
Well, the RV would be covered under an RV auto policy, and then which would not cover any carport or any other structures there. So that would have to be a separate policy as well.
Okay. Perfect. This is like all over the map, so I feel like we've covered quite a bit of ground. You ladies have been incredible. I appreciate your time. I also appreciate the volume of questions from the audience. This is a really interesting topic, a timely topic, and for you guys to take time out while it is so busy processing all these claims, we really, really appreciate. So thank you so much for your time. If anybody from the audience needs any help, I've got Gina's contact information in the chat. You're welcome to reach out to her. And if we can be of help in any way, let us know as well. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch you on the next one.